The Polaroid Curse, a true-life horror story. In the summer of 1983, the Emerson family, Richard, his wife Linda, and their two children Jacob and Emily, set out for what was supposed to be a peaceful vacation. Their destination was a secluded cabin in the Oregon wilderness, a place untouched by modern distractions. Richard, an amateur photographer, had brought along his prized Polaroid camera, eager to document their retreat. None of them could have known that the photos they took would become a cursed chronicle of their fate. The first few days were uneventful. The family enjoyed hiking, roasting marshmallows, and playing board games by lantern light. The Polaroids captured their laughter, the dense green of the trees, and the sun glinting off the lake. Then the first anomaly appeared. Richard had snapped a picture of Linda standing by the cabin's front door, smiling. When the film developed, a tall, shadowy figure loomed behind her, just inside the doorway. The figure had no discernible features, just an elongated form stretching toward the ceiling. Richard stared at the image, feeling a cold prickle down his spine. He turned toward the door. Nothing. He laughed it off. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe the chemicals in the film had degraded. But as he tucked the Polaroid into his pocket, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. The second strange photo came the next day. Jacob had been playing near the edge of the lake, tossing stones into the water. Richard took a picture. When it developed, a pale, disfigured face was visible just beneath the lake's surface, staring up at Jacob. Panic seized Richard's chest. He ran to the water, but it was undisturbed, rippling only from the skipping stones. Still, he pulled Jacob back to the cabin and didn't let him near the water again. Then came the night terrors. Emily woke up screaming, saying she saw a man standing at the foot of her bed. When Linda flipped on the light, the room was empty. The next morning, Richard took a Polaroid of Emily sitting at the breakfast table. The photo revealed a skeletal hand resting on her shoulder. That was when they decided to leave. Frantic, Richard stuffed their belongings into suitcases while Linda gathered the children. But just before they could load the car, Emily pointed toward the woods. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling, "he's out there." Richard turned, Polaroid in hand, and snapped a photo. The camera whirred, and he waited, heart pounding, as the image faded into view. The shadowy figure was there, standing at the edge of the trees, closer now. Its limbs seemed too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. They sped away, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror, but their nightmare had only begun. Back home, the Polaroids didn't stop. Richard developed a picture of their living room. The figure was there, half hidden behind the couch. In another, taken at the children's school, its dark form loomed in the background near the playground. The photos weren't capturing the past, they were foretelling something. The last picture was the worst. Richard took a family photo, hoping to prove to himself that nothing was wrong. But when the Polaroid developed, their own faces were distorted, warped, decayed, as if they had been rotting for years. And standing in the center, clearer than ever, was the figure. No longer a shadow, but a grotesque entity with empty sockets for eyes and a wide, lipless grin. One by one, the predictions came true. Jacob was the first to die. He drowned in the community pool 2 days later, though he had been nowhere near the deep end. Emily followed, hit by a car while chasing her soccer ball into the street. Linda, overcome with grief, hung herself in their bedroom. Richard was the last. Days after burying his wife, he turned the Polaroid camera on himself, desperate for answers. The image developed slowly. When it cleared, he saw his own reflection, but behind him stood the entity, grinning. His body was found the next morning, his face frozen in an expression of unspeakable terror. The police and later the FBI investigated the deaths, but nothing could explain the Polaroids. No evidence of tampering, no rational explanation. The camera was seized, but under government custody, it continued to produce disturbing images until it was reportedly destroyed. Yet whispers remain. Some claim the camera still exists, hidden away in a classified archive. Others say it has resurfaced, passed down through unknown hands, its dark influence persisting. A few have even reported finding old Polaroids in thrift stores or flea markets. Pictures of strangers with blurred faces and shadowy figures lingering in the background. One woman, a researcher obsessed with the Emerson case, came forward years later with a chilling story. She had managed to track down one of the surviving Polaroids. Late one night, she took a picture of herself in the mirror with an old instant camera. The next morning, she discovered the developed photo. In the reflection, she was no longer alone. The camera, she swore, had captured something standing just behind her. A week later, she vanished without a trace. The legend endures, growing darker with each retelling. To this day, some believe that the camera had become a vessel for something beyond human understanding, something that fed on fear, on inevitability. Others say it was all a tragic coincidence. But if you ever come across an old Polaroid camera, abandoned and waiting, think twice before taking a picture. You might not like what you see. And if you do, don't keep it. Burn it. Destroy it. Before it captures you next. If you thought that was scary, wait until you hear this next story. The Silent Village, a true-life horror story. On the morning of October 12, 1987, a lone journalist, Daniel Whitmore, arrived at the remote village of Dunmere, located deep within the forests of northern England. He had been sent to investigate a baffling mystery. The entire population of 400 people had vanished overnight. There were no signs of struggle, no indications of where they had gone, just an entire village, empty and abandoned. The first thing he noticed was the silence. There was no bird song, no rustling of leaves, only an oppressive, suffocating quiet that made his own footsteps seem deafening. The houses stood undisturbed. Windows were shut, doors were unlocked, meals half-eaten on dining tables, as if the villagers had been plucked from existence in an instant. There were no cars on the roads, no footprints leading out of town, just stillness. Then he saw them, the animals. Dogs, cats, even livestock, all starving, their ribs protruding, their eyes filled with a desperate, haunted look. They wandered the empty streets or lay curled on doorsteps, waiting for masters who would never return. Some whimpered at the sight of him. Others ran in fearful confusion, their instinct warning them of something unseen. The most disturbing sight was a group of dogs sitting outside the village church, staring blankly at its darkened entrance as if waiting for something, or someone, to emerge. As Daniel made his way through the village, he found a diary in one of the homes. Its last entry was dated the previous evening and spoke of an unease that had settled over the town. The writer described hearing whispers in the night, voices that were too faint to understand yet too persistent to ignore. Others had heard them too, the diary noted, and many believed something was lurking beyond the village boundaries, just out of sight. Further exploration led him to the town hall, where a dusty collection of old photographs and records revealed something even stranger. The faces of the villagers, taken in recent years, all bore the same vacant expression, distant, almost lifeless. One of the oldest photos, dating back to 1903, sent a chill down Daniel's spine. The same empty stares. The same unsettling stillness. And in the background of every group picture, in the shadows of every frame, a vague humanoid shape. The discovery made him uneasy. It was as if something had always been with them, something lurking just beyond recognition. His skin crawled as he flipped through the pages of an old ledger. The final recorded entry was a single word, written in large, frantic strokes. "It's awake." You felt it then. The sensation of being watched. A shift in the air, a presence unseen yet undeniable. It wasn't just paranoia, something was here. He turned and saw a reflection in the glass of a cabinet. But it wasn't his own. Heart pounding, he bolted out of the building, the oppressive silence swallowing his every step. The animals, those that had followed him before, were now cowering, hiding beneath porches and behind overturned furniture. The church doors, previously shut, now stood open. A deep, inhuman whisper drifted from within. Daniel never spoke of what he saw inside the church. He never wrote about it. When he emerged, his face was pale, his body trembling. He fled the village, leaving his car behind, running on foot until he reached the nearest town. By the time authorities arrived at Dunmere, they found only what he had. An empty village, its inhabitants gone without a trace. The pets had all perished. Every single one of them, as if they had simply given up. To this day, no one knows what happened to the people of Dunmere. The village was declared uninhabitable and left to decay, though some say lights can still be seen in the windows at night. Occasionally, travelers report hearing whispers in the woods near the ruins, faint voices calling out in languages long forgotten. But those who go looking for answers never return. Determined to unravel the mystery, a team of researchers revisited Dunmere a decade later. They brought state-of-the-art equipment, voice recorders and thermal imaging cameras. What they found only deepened the horror. The village was exactly as it had been left, dust covering the remains of a once thriving community. But their recordings captured something chilling, low murmurs, a cacophony of whispers in an unknown dialect, growing louder each night. On the third night, the lead researcher, Dr. Michael Henshaw, vanished without a trace. His tent was found intact, his belongings undisturbed, his shoes still beside his cot. The only clue was a single word scrawled onto his field notes. "It watches." The remaining team fled, abandoning their equipment. When a retrieval team arrived days later, they found something even more bizarre. The team's notebooks and digital recordings were blank. Photographs taken the night before were completely blacked out, as if the village itself had erased the evidence of their presence. The government officially sealed off Dunmere after this incident, citing environmental hazards. Satellite images show the village overgrown, nature reclaiming the land, but no one dares step foot inside. However, locals still tell stories, campers hearing voices in the night, drivers spotting silhouettes standing at the treeline. Sometimes, hikers claim to find Polaroid photos scattered in the woods, images of people who have long since disappeared. Some believe the villagers vanished by choice, taken by a force beyond human comprehension. Others suspect a darker fate, that they were consumed by whatever had been waiting in the shadows all along. And then there are those who believe the animals were left behind not as victims, but as warnings. To this day, Dunmere remains silent. A place where nothing stirs, nothing breathes. Nothing human, at least. And if you ever find yourself lost in the woods near the ruins, and the silence suddenly feels too heavy, turn back. Because something is still watching. Brace yourself, because the next story is even more disturbing. The Cursed VHS, a true crime horror story. Police report, missing person case number 3742. Date, November 2, 1997. Investigator, Detective Samuel Grayson. Missing individual, Thomas L. Brenner. Last known location, apartment 3B, Cedar Avenue, New York. Incident summary: on October 30, 1997, Thomas Brenner, 26, was reported missing by his sister, Emily Brenner, after he failed to return calls or show up for work. Upon entering his apartment, authorities found the door locked from the inside. No signs of struggle or forced entry. The only item of note was a VHS tape inside a running VCR, displaying nothing but static. The television was still on when officers arrived. Brenner was never found. It started as an innocuous find. Thomas had picked up the VHS tape at a flea market on October 28, intrigued by its lack of any identifying label. Just a plain black cassette with no markings. When he got home, curiosity got the best of him and he slid the tape into his player. The footage began innocuously enough, grainy static that flickered across the screen before fading into warped, distorted images. The first scene appeared to be an old, abandoned house, its wooden floors creaking under an unseen force. There were no people, only brief, disjointed cuts to empty rooms, hallways leading nowhere, doors that opened into darkness. Whispers filled the background, barely audible yet persistent, like voices speaking just behind his ear. Thomas couldn't look away. He later told his sister that the tape gave him an overwhelming sense of unease. He felt watched, as if the footage was aware of him. After 20 minutes, the static returned and the screen went black. When he rewound and played it again, the footage had changed. This time there was movement. A figure, tall, featureless, standing at the end of a dimly lit hallway. It did not move. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of desperate voices. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure was gone. Thomas turned off the tape, shaking. That night, he swore he heard footsteps in his apartment, though he lived alone. 2 days later, he vanished. Police report, missing person case number 3856. Date, January 5, 1998. Investigator, Detective Samuel Grayson. Missing individual, Karen J. Holloway. Last known location, Evergreen Motel, room 16. Incident summary: Karen Holloway, a 34-year-old journalist investigating the disappearance of Thomas Brenner, vanished under similar circumstances. Her motel room was found undisturbed except for an old VHS tape inside the room's television. The screen displayed nothing but static. No signs of forced entry, struggle, or personal belongings missing. Like Brenner, her body was never recovered. Karen had been following leads on Thomas's case when she came into possession of the tape. She had contacted a source, a former video store employee who claimed the tape had been dropped off at their shop years ago by an unknown man who never returned. She planned to watch it that evening. Her last known journal entry was scrawled in frantic, uneven handwriting. It knows when you're watching. The whispers aren't in the tape. They're in the room. I saw it. The figure. At the foot of my bed. After Karen's disappearance, the tape was taken into police custody. The officer assigned to catalog it, Sergeant William Harper, was found dead in his home 3 days later. The cause of death, unknown. The only item recovered near his body was a television, turned to static, and the VHS tape, still inside the VCR. Final investigation, Detective Grayson's last report. Date, March 14, 1998. I had to see it for myself. The disappearances, the whispers, the untraceable origins of the tape, there had to be a logical explanation. I retrieved it from evidence, locked myself in my office and pressed play. The footage was as described. Empty hallways, shifting shadows. And then, the figure. It stood closer than before, just inside the frame, its head tilted as though it were listening. Then it turned. I felt my body tense. A deep, gut-wrenching dread filled me as the screen went black. But in the reflection of my office window, I saw movement behind me. I turned. Nothing was there. I ejected the tape and sealed it back in the evidence locker. I filed my final report and left the precinct. That night, I checked into a motel far from town, disconnected my phone, and stared at the blank screen of a television I refused to turn on. 2 weeks later, the evidence locker at the station was found empty. The tape was gone. Postscript. The disappearances remain unsolved. The tape's whereabouts are unknown. Reports continue to surface, claims of a blank VHS tape appearing in thrift stores, abandoned houses, and pawn shops. Each time it is played, someone vanishes. If you ever find an unmarked tape, resist the urge to watch. Because once you see it, it sees you too. Now, for another dark and haunting tale that will send shivers down your spine. Project Blackout, a declassified nightmare. Declassified file number 9178, Project Blackout. Recovered by James Calloway, investigative journalist. Date, August 14, 2022. I first came across the files while researching the inexplicable disappearance of 4 campers in Yellowstone National Park. The case had been cold for years. No bodies, no leads, no evidence of foul play. But something felt off. A Freedom of Information request turned up hundreds of heavily redacted documents, buried under unrelated reports. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the header. Project Blackout, classified. What I uncovered changed everything. The files were fragments, torn apart by black ink and missing pages, but they told a chilling story. Project Blackout had been a covert operation conducted by an unnamed government agency between 1975 and 1992. Its purpose? Human experimentation on isolated civilians. Campers, hikers, drifters. People whose absence would go unnoticed. They were taken under the cover of night, transported to classified sites, and subjected to experiments that read like science fiction or horror. File excerpt. Subject number 0219, recovered testimony. Date unknown, redacted, facility location. They took me from my tent. I woke up strapped to a metal chair, needles in my arms. They spoke in whispers, moving around me like shadows. A voice, I think it was in my head, kept repeating the same phrase. You are not real. You were never real. I saw others, strapped down. Some of them screaming. Some of them smiling. Their eyes black, like something had hollowed them out. The files hinted at a range of disturbing tests. Psychological warfare, neurological conditioning, sensory deprivation. But what disturbed me most were the reports of campers returning, weeks, sometimes months later, with no memory of their disappearance. They spoke of strange dreams, of hearing voices in the woods, of waking up in places miles away from their last known location. Many of them didn't last long. Suicide. Accidents. Sudden disappearances. One file described a man who had been found wandering a Colorado hiking trail, dazed, with blood seeping from his ears. He had vanished 4 months earlier. His autopsy report, buried within the documents, revealed something horrifying. His brain had been surgically altered. A warning comes too late. As I dug deeper, I started receiving emails from untraceable accounts. Stop now. They're watching. One night, I noticed a black SUV parked outside my apartment. The next morning, my research files were gone. My laptop wiped clean. A warning clear as day. But I couldn't stop. I tracked the last known location of Project Blackout to a decommissioned research facility in northern Montana. Local reports spoke of strange lights in the forest, of hikers who went missing only to return different. I had to see it for myself. What I found still haunts me. The facility. Deep in the woods, behind rusted fencing and collapsed watchtowers, was the entrance to a bunker. The door was open as if waiting. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside. Inside, I found examination rooms with rusted medical equipment. Walls lined with containment units, each large enough to hold a human. Empty files scattered the floor, their contents long since destroyed. But one document remained intact, wedged beneath a desk. Phase 3 initiated, long-term integration. Before I could read further, I heard movement. Not footsteps, something else. the low rhythmic hum. My vision blurred, my head pounded. The air vibrated around me and I felt a presence pressing into my skull. I turned and ran, bursting into the cold night air, my lungs burning. I don't remember getting back to my car. I don't remember the drive home. But ever since that night, things have been different. I wake up in places I don't remember going. I hear whispers when I close my eyes. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear my reflection moves before I do. New leads, darker truths. Determined to uncover more, I contacted a former government contractor who claimed to have worked on Project Blackout. He was hesitant, paranoid. We met in a secluded diner where he passed me a small folder. Inside were photographs, images of people who had vanished then reappeared, their faces different. Eyes dull. Expressions vacant. A note was scribbled on the last page. Phase 4 is happening now. They aren't testing anymore. They're replacing. I pressed for answers but the contractor shook his head and left. The next day I heard he'd suffered an accident. A car crash with no witnesses. I started seeing familiar faces in unfamiliar places. People I swore had vanished, now walking the streets, their movements too precise, their stares too empty. Something about them was wrong. And then I saw myself. A reflection in a shop window. But it wasn't mirroring me. It was smiling when I wasn't. Tilting its head in ways I never did. I turned away, my heart pounding. I don't know how much longer I have before they come for me. Project Blackout, still active? The files suggest the program was shut down in 1992, but the disappearances never stopped. People still go missing in national parks under circumstances eerily similar to those described in the documents. If Project Blackout was truly over, then why was the bunker still active? Why did I find fresh footprints in the dust? And why is there another me watching from the shadows? I don't know how much time I have left before they come for me. But if you're reading this, know this. The experiments never stopped. They just got better at hiding them. That was only the beginning. Let's see what horrors await us in the next story. The Shadow Language, a Global Nightmare. Investigator, Dr. Elias Wakefield, linguist and anthropologist. Date, September 7, 2023. It started with a single symbol. A crude, geometric carving found on a fallen tree in the Black Forest of Germany, just yards away from where a family of 4 had vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no bodies, just their abandoned campsite and the eerie, cryptic marking. The local authorities dismissed it as vandalism. But weeks later, identical symbols began appearing elsewhere, etched into stone in a remote Nepalese monastery, burned into the walls of a deserted cabin in Canada, drawn in dust on a New York City subway platform. And each time they marked the site of another disappearance. I first became involved when a colleague forwarded me an image from a missing persons case in Norway. As a linguist specializing in lost languages, I was asked to identify the symbol's origin. But I couldn't. It wasn't Norse, it wasn't runic, it wasn't even close to any known writing system. And yet, something about it felt familiar. I spent weeks poring over the scattered cases, traveling to locations where the symbols had been found. The more I looked, the more I found. They were spreading. They weren't just showing up at sites of disappearances anymore. They were appearing before people went missing, as if marking their fate in advance. The symbols weren't just graffiti. They were a warning. The patterns began to emerge. The disappearances were occurring with chilling precision. I compiled reports from 6 continents, people of all ages, backgrounds, and professions, vanishing into thin air with only these symbols left behind. In some cases, the victims had spoken about seeing the symbols in the days before their disappearance. On their bathroom mirrors, in condensation on bus windows, carved into trees on their hiking routes. And always they described the same eerie sensation, the feeling of being watched. I traced the earliest known cases back decades, but old journals and eyewitness accounts hinted at something even older. A Mayan temple discovered in the 1940s had markings strikingly similar to the symbols. In a forgotten wing of the Vatican archives, a letter from 1783 detailed the case of a French village that vanished overnight, leaving only strange symbols behind, burned into the wooden beams of empty homes. Even ancient cave paintings in Australia bore markings eerily close to those I was now tracking. It wasn't just a modern anomaly. This was something that had been happening for centuries. And it was getting worse. A warning comes too late. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. The symbols weren't just markers. They were a language. An evolving, shifting script that seemed to be communicating something. But who, or what, was speaking? I started experiencing what others had reported. The symbols began appearing in my life. My notebook pages would be covered in them when I awoke, though I had no memory of writing them. They appeared on the fogged-up window of my car. Once, I saw one reflected in my own eye when I looked into a mirror. Then I began to see them move. At first, it was just an illusion, an odd flicker at the edges of my vision. But soon, I could swear they were shifting, rearranging themselves when I looked away. I recorded them obsessively, but every time I tried to translate them, the meaning felt just beyond my grasp. My dreams were no longer my own. I woke gasping, the symbols burned into my memory like afterimages. People close to me warned me to stop. A former student of mine, helping with research, sent me a final message before vanishing. They are not symbols. They are an invitation. And then my phone rang. A voice whispered in a language I didn't understand. The final discovery. I followed the trail of the symbols to an abandoned monastery in Romania, rumored to be one of the first places they had appeared in the modern era. Deep within its ruined halls, I found a single intact scroll. Faded and delicate, it bore an inscription of the symbols, and next to it, a translation written centuries ago by a terrified monk. The words chilled me to my core. They are not written. They are spoken. They are not seen. They are understood. They do not wait. They summon. As I read the words, the shadows in the room deepened. The air turned heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. My vision blurred, and I realized with growing horror that the symbols on the wall were no longer carved. They were shifting, forming new shapes. A new message just for me. And then the candlelight flickered out. The shadow language spreads. I escape, but I am not free. The symbols are everywhere now. They are appearing in places they shouldn't be. Scratched into bus stops, appearing in the reflections of windows, blinking in the static of television screens. More people are disappearing, and I know now that it will not stop. Because I understand what the shadow language is. It is a doorway. It is a beacon. It is a call. And now that I have read it, it knows my name. It knows yours too. And soon it will speak to you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling stories. And hit the bell icon to never miss an update.